Hey everybody, I'm here with Destiny. We're going to talk about the secular case for objective morality. And I have laid out my argument here. The reason why I wanted to do the stream with Destiny did a debate recently with Tom Jump that we were talking about a little bit before we got started here. Tom Jump took the affirmative position in favor of objective morality. Destiny took the negative position. And just to be clear, Destiny, is your position in favor of subjective morality, or just you don't think morality can be objective?
I believe I don't even believe morality is a real thing. So if we do have a conversation about morality, I'm going to say it's incredibly relative and incredibly subjective. Is going to be my position.
Okay. So I want to lay out. I know a lot of the theists make a case for objective morality that I don't like at all, because it just seems like that they are wanting to say that morality is objective so that they can use God as an enforcement mechanism. And really, morality, they're not using the word objective in the same way, like there's a scientific definition of objective. And maybe we should go into that first, the difference between objective and subjective, because I think we will agree there. I think the theists basically are making a case for something I would call more like aspirational morality. Like they're basically saying that there's a best case way to order society, to set up a list of rules for society that is would be the best way to do it, and that they are calling objective, but I would say it's more aspirational. So they're saying that this way is out there and we're searching for it. Now, normally the moral subjectivists will look around the world and say, okay, there are all these different societies with all these different moral frameworks, so therefore morality must be subjective. But I want to make the case that there is somewhat of an aspirational morality out there, but it is limited by a set of rules that we can define. So are you following me, or do you want to throw anything out there? So on objective and subjective, how are you defining objective and subjective?
So objective, I guess in this sense, I would mean like objective means that when we talk about morals or moral fact, these are features of the world that anybody can observe, that if all humanity were wiped away, they would still continue to exist. So I believe that there is some collection of particles or matter that make up what we call a tree, a particular tree, and that if all humans were to be erased immediately, that tree would still be existent. Like something else could appear and also see that tree, that if some independent third frame of reference was there that could observe everything, that tree would still exist. But morality, moral fact, I would say only exists insofar as its ideas in people's minds. So if all humanity were wiped away, morality would be wiped away as well, because morality isn't a real thing or a feature of the world. It's just something that we talk about to describe other things.
Okay, so independent of human minds, basically.
Sure, yeah.
So we're in total agreement there. And this is where I have a problem with the theist argument for objective morality. So, but would you, there are special cases that are like emergent facts, like for instance, the value of gold at any given time. We can go to a website, we can look it up. There's a measurement that you and I can come to an agreement on what the value of gold is today, correct? So that is another level of objectivity that some people have a problem with. But I would say in order for us to talk about morality, we really need to talk about these emergent facts, which are in some ways objective.
Okay. I mean, I would say that like when we talk about like the value of gold, what we're really talking about is that there is some there is some unit of exchange that two people agree upon to trade one object for some amount of money, right? That's what when we say the value of gold, right?
Correct.
But that agreed upon value that's like a human idea. What if all humans were wiped away? Aliens couldn't come by and go like, oh, there's a bar of gold. Like it's probably worth about 2,000 USD or something, right? Like that value is like an idea that exists. Yeah. Totally. So the value of gold is subjective the same way that like a moral statement is subjective, I would say.
Right. So we can't say that it's independent of human minds, but there's another aspect of objectivity that we consider all the time. It's this agreed upon measurement. Like we can agree that the height of buildings are objective because we're agreeing upon a measurement system. Like you can measure a building in metric, you can measure a building in inches and feet. They're two different systems of measurement, but the fact that we agree upon a measurement is important in objectivity. Otherwise, we can't come to some kind of consensus.
Yeah,
on objective facts.
Sure, and I don't disagree with that, but like, so we have to be careful what we consider to be objective here. So your argument is saying that, like, okay, so we can measure a building in inches or feet the same way that we can measure an act as harmful or virtuous. Even though like these measurements are kind of abstract, there's still like an underlying fact of the matter. Now, I don't disagree with you, but and maybe this statement seems more extreme on face value. I would say, well, inches and feet clearly don't exist, right? If all humans were wiped away, inches and feet are just things that we all agree upon. These are ideas that exist in our head, and then we've written them on paper, but they only exist insofar as the human ideas. So an inch, we could define it as being 10 times as large as it is now, or half the size that it is now, right? An inch isn't like a feature of the world. It's not like an actual fact of the world. Whereas like, and then the same thing with morality, right? Like one person murdering another, there is an underlying objective fact here, right? Somebody has driven a knife through somebody's heart or pulled the trigger and executed somebody with a gun or rifle. But to call that action wrong requires some subjective, non-existent unit of measurement that we all kind of just agree on. That's independent of like the actual world. It's just like an idea that exists in our heads.
Yeah, we're in total agreement so far. So the building is objectively a certain particular height. The measurement system that we use is somewhat subjective, but we do collectively agree upon a measurement system. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to discern objective reality.
Sure.
Right. So the difference that I have with most people in this morality, the subjective morality debate, is that they're not agreeing upon a metric to measure by. They're simply looking at the independent facts and saying, you know, this is like you point out with the inches thing. They're saying this inch thing is objective, and you're going, no, it's not. We're collectively deciding that it's an inch. Like it measures objective things in the world, but they're never really pointing to, well, what exactly are we going to measure?
Like for example, like inches and feet. Actually, I'm pretty sure. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that they're what they've been measured as has even changed throughout history.
Yes.
Like I think a foot has not always been like the exact same length. That wasn't even standardized until like long into the existence of these units at all. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So there's different metrics that we can measure by. And one of the things that I am looking at here, in order for us to come up with any kind of measurement for morality, first of all, we have to define morality specifically. And this is another place where I have a difference with the theists and the general people talking about objective morality. And in particular, where it was very frustrating when you had the debate with Tom Jump, because I was like, well, you guys have started this conversation. You really haven't even defined morality. Now, there's a lot of social psychologists that are kind of defining morality in this way, that morality is a set of rules that governs a group of people, that it's basically a set of rules that a group of people adopt to become a community. And in evolutionary terms, it's to compete for resources in the environment. This is why morality evolved in us. Do you believe in evolution, obviously, correct?
I do. I hesitate to use. So this is called a just so story. So basically, we make some observations about given facts of human behavior. Men tend to be larger than women. We tend to organize in hierarchies, right? And then we say, well, because this happened, I think that we organized this way because of these reasons. The why there is very difficult to defend and oftentimes just completely whatever. So I mean, I don't broadly, I would probably kind of agree, but I would be careful. I would caution against thinking like just because we observe some given trait in humanity doesn't necessarily mean that we evolved for some given purpose or that something like happened this way because of another thing. Like it's entirely possible that certain behaviors we have. So for instance, I think female women are some of the only creatures that have pleasure during sex. Like generally it's not pleasurable for women. That could have just been a byproduct. That might not have been selected for. That could just be a byproduct with some other feature that evolved, or it could have been. It's really, really hard to know the case. But yeah, so I just want to to be clear on that.
Well, I completely agree with you. Just so stories aside, and we definitely have to be careful of just so stories. But you do buy into the fact that we as human beings evolved, and that our behaviors evolved as through the process of natural selection, right? Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think I believe in that. That seems to be like the leading scientific theory right now. So yeah, I don't have anything better to believe. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some dissent over how exactly morality evolved, and this is where like you're right in bringing up the just so stories. There's different competing theories. I'm a fan of Jonathan Haidt, who has put forward moral foundations theory, which basically attempts to catalog all of our moral intuitions. And it was funny that you had the debate with Tom Jump, and Tom Jump was talking about this morality. He's saying morality is basically about human freedom, but human freedom is really only one aspect of morality. There's all these other aspects of morality. And Jonathan Haidt has kind of narrowed it down to about 6 moral foundations, and tried to base all of those moral foundations on huge bodies of study. Like one of them is the Care Harm Foundation, which is based on attachment theory, which was developed by John Bowlby. Like there's been decades of research on it. So I am conscious of the fact that you're talking about the just so story things, but there has been plenty of empirical study here. And empirical study is that's how we get towards something objective. So
true, but be careful. There is no study that can show us that like we evolved a given trait for a particular purpose. Like that's really, really, really hard to actually say like, oh, well, like you could do this, but it would require an immense amount of archaeological evidence, most of which has probably been destroyed, an immense amount of like sociological and anthropologic understanding of like how a society existed and lived at some given point in time, and then to be able to trace this like longitudinally throughout generations of like human existence. Like it's so hard to make like that causal statement, like we evolved this feature for this thing. Like that's really hard. So like here's an example, right? Like why do we swallow air or I swallow air? Why do we swallow food and inhale air through like the same pipe, like in our throat? You know, like like we can obviously choke to death. You know, it seems like a pretty bad design. And you know, so people say like, well, it's energy efficient to have like one pathway for everything. It doesn't make sense to evolve these things separately. So it's easy to say like, well, we evolved our throat that way because it saves energy. But that might not be true. Having a dual system might actually end up being more energy efficient. Maybe it's just the precursor species to us had one throat for a totally different reason, right? That's the only reason I'm trying to be like really careful here, is because it's really easy to jump off from this, like we evolved this thing for this reason 100%, to go right into biological prescriptivism. Since we have this feature and we evolved it for this reason, this must be some true thing. That's the only people tend to make like biological observations, and they want to jump right into moral prescriptions from there. So they'll say something like, men tend to be larger than women. Men ought to be the protectors of women. It's like, whoa, well, hold on, right? Or because they'll also have like the just so story where like men are bigger than women, and therefore they ought to be the protectors of women because we evolved for men to be the protectors of women. Like, well, that might not necessarily be true, right? Maybe androgen makes us stronger, but maybe there was some other reason why androgen in men and being androgen sensitive was selected for a long time ago that made it advantageous for us to split in that way. Maybe being stronger wasn't a reason, right? It's just, yeah, I'm really, really cautious against those just so stories. Like it's so easy to get lost like really far down a tunnel where you've convinced yourself of so much that is kind of all like on really shaky grounds. That's the only reason I'm like, I push back against those a lot. There's a lot of motivated reasoning that can get bought into that, and yeah, it's really scary. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Destiny, I'm very disappointed. You don't believe that men evolved to protect women?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. That could be the case. I'm just saying, like, it's really hard to like make that statement.
No, men evolved to keep them in the cave,
Sure.
man.
Okay.
not to let them loose.
Yeah, depending on who you talk to.
I totally agree with you, and we're on the same page here. And this is the reason why I'm not getting into specifics. I think when people get into specifics, then that's when the conversation sort of derails.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to build a case here that there is this thing that happened evolutionarily, like us building the ability to cooperate as human beings gave us a survival advantage over other species that couldn't cooperate, right? Because we could form larger and larger groups. Now, as soon as we started forming these groups, those groups became competitors against one another, and the larger group has a survival advantage over a smaller group. Do you disagree there?
Larger groups like in nature or today in history or?
Well, just in general, like even if we go back to like tribal days, like if a group of 100 men
Mhm.
and a group of 1,000 men, which one has the survival advantage?
I don't
I
know.
know you don't want
Like,
to say you saw the movie 300. You're like,
well,
I
no,
know the
like,
answer
so
to
like
this.
again, like, man, do you know what an alt-writer is?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
so I got down the race realism hole, and I started to read.
Well, I'm not doing
No,
race
I know
today.
you're not. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that, like,
independent of
I
race.
used to be so much more confident in my assertions about like human behavior and
Mhm.
human biology until I started to like read more and understand more about how insanely complex like human evolutionary history is. So like it's going to be impossible to get me to agree with almost any like this is why this
So
is
so
same. So for
let's
instance, so when you say like the difference between 1,000 people and 100 people, well, like okay, well like 2 years ago, my gut would say like, oh well, 1,000 people like clearly have an advantage, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe 1,000 people in a single area, maybe they're more prone to over hunting or over farming a certain area or over like taking over the environment,
sure.
and it causes them to be unsustainable. Maybe a group that large is more prone to infighting. Maybe humans can only keep up like maybe
Yes.
90 or so relationships, and then past that it causes. So like I don't know what the answer to that is. I could
Keep
perceive it
it
being,
coming.
yeah, I could see it being like a
You're
million different
doing
things.
great.
Okay.
But the measure, all the things that you're bringing up, right? Let's
Hmm.
talk about the movie 300, right? What is it? 300 men took down 10,000, right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's the movie 300, right?
Well, I think they
What
lost,
these
but yeah.
two, yeah, they ultimately did lose.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But the thing that the two groups are competing on is moral systems. Even the examples that you gave are moral systems. You were saying a group of people that has a more sustainable outlook on the world, has a system of behavior that is more sustainable to the environment, may outlast a larger group that has a less sustainable group. You talked about infighting. You said maybe infighting weakens a group. Okay, the morality is based on rules around things like infighting and resource allocation, that kind of thing. These are the moral system. So that's why I'm saying
I mean, it could. So let's make sure that we're on the same page here. So if we could
okay.
say that evolution has one purpose, which I would say it does,
Mhm.
what is the singular purpose of evolution or natural selection?
Survival and reproduction.
Okay,
Yeah,
close. It's actually it's only reproduction. The only thing that
right.
evolution cares about is passing on genetic material. Whether you survive or not is whatever.
We
If you
agree.
can pass,
Yes.
yeah, if you can pass on genetic material at 5 years old, then it doesn't care if you live till 50 or 100. Or if you could have 100 babies and only half of them survive at 20, that's better than having every
Totally.
child survive at
Yes.
85 or whatever, right? So if we understand that, right, it could be that we could hypothesize that a group of master rapist humans exist that are capable of flying and swooping down and raping like every woman like instantly and getting them pregnant. If this was the case, this would probably be like we could hypothesize that this genetic material would have a higher chance of being passed on than any other type of genetic material. Now, would we call that moral or morality because that's just the way that things evolved?
Well, we wouldn't call it there. We wouldn't call it our morality. Definitely, this is two competing moral systems, and this, I mean, this exists in the real world. We don't have to hypothesize about these different creatures. There is a difference of opinion between the Mormons who practice polygamy, which, exactly like you said, polygamy is about producing as many babies as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
The men are going to take on multiple wives, and they're just gonna. Some of these polygamists have like 100 kids, right? That is a great way to grow your moral community very, very quickly. Now, whether or not polygamy has kinds of trade-offs, because a lot of people apostate from Mormonism because if you're a low status male in a society where they practice polygamy, there aren't enough women to go around. So the males end up leaving. So there are trade-offs. And that's all I'm getting at here is morality is a set of rules that binds a community into a collective group. And that group is competing for reproduction. Well, survival, reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
In order to make reproduction work, you have to admit there are certain ways to be more reproductively viable that involve marshaling resources, etc.
Yeah, it seems to
So,
be the case. But I'm getting kind of
yes.
confused because it seems like you've agreed with almost everything I've said so far. You're
Yeah,
the
you're
one.
making my argument. It's awesome. I love it.
Okay, hold on, wait. Which one of us is supposed to be arguing for objective morality?
Well, you're this. I guess you never really answered in the beginning. If
Oh,
you're in favor of secular, you believe morality is subjective.
yeah,
Do
but
you
it's
believe it's arbitrary?
define arbitrary. What do you mean?
Well, if we are going to define morality as a set of rules that binds a community together, can that community make any rules at all and still sustain itself? Like
Well,
you
yeah,
went to the
that
rape
seems to be
thing.
the case, right? Yeah.
Well, I disagree. That's why I think morality is objective. An example that I use, and this might make things clear, is so airplanes are designed with certain features because they have to be, otherwise they're designed around the constraints of the environment, right? If you can't design an airplane arbitrarily and still say it will fly, correct?
Sure.
Yeah, so you can't design a moral system arbitrarily and still get the features that morality gives evolutionarily, which is binding people into a cooperative group that is sustainable over time. So if you for perhaps introduce into your moral system some rule that is destabilizing to the system, that moral system will die out. And these moral systems have evolved over time through this evolutionary process.
Sure.
The
I don't.
groups of people that are sustaining them either
Mhm.
die out or survive based on the viability of their moral system.
I don't necessarily disagree with this, maybe, but like all of this points to morality being just an objective thing. Like I don't understand how we're. Wait, did I say objective or subjective?
Objective.
Sorry,
I'm
I said,
winning.
No,
I'm winning.
Sorry. So all of this points to morality being like a subjective thing. Like there is no underlying fact of the matter. Like it seems like we don't disagree on any of these points. That morality is just whatever. It can just be something that helps people survive, but it's not like a fact of the world. Like it's not like a thing that actually exists. Like we can't point to it anywhere. We can't measure it. Like.
Well, you can measure it because listen, if we're competing on, well, evolutionarily, we've agreed that we're competing on putting out babies, right?
Well, that's
So if you have
but now we're like squarely in the realm of biological prescriptivism. We're saying that whatever is morally right is whatever furthers the existence of the human species. That's
And I'm not saying that. I'm saying this is how evolution made us, and this is the goal of evolution, not necessarily the goal of us. And I agree.
Yeah, but if
with
it's
you.
the goal of evolution, does that make it right? Does that make it moral?
No, not at all.
Wait, so then what are you saying is moral? How do we figure out what's moral?
What is your stance on polygamy?
I'm neutral. I don't care.
Okay, so you're neutral on polygamy.
Yeah.
I would say that we should measure based on like any moral prescription should be measured on its societal effects.
Yeah, but what societal effect are you controlling for? Like, what do you want to improve?
Well, generally people want to improve well-being. There's a well-being is obviously massively subjective.
Oh
yeah,
boy,
exactly.
Are we on our way to the moral landscape? It feels like every one of these conversations gets there eventually.
I'm curious because I couldn't stand that book. I'm curious your take on the moral landscape.
Well, I mean,
I'm not a big Sam Harris fan. But Sam Harris is a moral realist, and
sure, but aren't you a moral realist?
Yeah, definitely. But
it sounds like you're making like a similar argument. Like there's some vague concept of well-being that's never going to be defined, and then we're going to try to maximize said well-being, and then that's it.
Well, I would measure on something specific like the suicide rate.
So the best society is one society that doesn't have people commit suicide?
Yeah, I would think that's a decent metric.
Okay, so let's say that I murder every single person that is about to commit suicide. Is that a good society?
No, obviously not.
So then it's not about preventing suicide. There has to be something more. There's some other underlying value.
Hold on, I don't necessarily understand. That's what do you mean? So like I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying you're going to kill people before they commit suicide?
Yeah, there's something deeper. If that's not an acceptable thing, then suicide isn't what you care about. It's either preserving human life or having humans be happy or something. There has to be some deeper value than just people not committing suicide.
But in order for us to measure something, we have to agree upon an objective measurement, right? And I think you and I would both agree that we can measure how many people are checking out of the society via suicide every year. Like there's a suicide rate in Switzerland and there's a suicide rate in America.
Yeah.
And those are objective measurements. I'm only using suicide rate as something that we could objectively measure. So if we conceptualize morality as a set of rules that govern society, and then there's different levels of this. Obviously, they range from socially enforced rules to legally enforced rules. Like rules against murder and rape and those kind of things, obviously they're so important that the society codifies them into law. Smaller rules are usually enforced socially. So there are a wide range of rules. And I would even go as far as saying like the reason why the American system is so good is because we even have competing moral systems within our society. One of the great things about America is we aren't a theocracy. So our moral systems are constantly evolving in the same way that our legal systems are evolving. We have the laboratories of democracy, as they say in the States. Our religious systems in the United States are laboratories of religion or moral philosophy or whatever you want to call them, but they are constantly evolving as well.
Yeah, but like my question is like what we're trying to get at is like,
States.
how do we figure out which moral system is correct?
Yes, and this is why I feel morality can't be subjective, because it can't be simply arbitrary. Like,
well, this is why. Well, this is
rules.
This is the whole argument. So I would argue there is no correct moral system, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you what is the correct moral system, and then you're going to say whichever one furthers humanity, or whichever one has most people being happy, or whichever one. Or you're going to give me some answer like that, and then I'm going to ask you, okay, well, why do you choose to value that thing? Why do you value happiness over sadness, or why do you value reproduction over preserving the planet, or why do you value this over that? And eventually, you're going to be forced to admit, well, okay, I mean, I don't know. It's just because that's what feels right, or that's what seems to be the case. And then I'm going to say, okay, so it's subjective. Like, there is no objective foundation for any of these rules. Like, I don't see how you can ever escape any part of that argument. Like, that tree is like inescapable, I think. Or if you feel there's some part there that you disagree with that you can push back on, I'd be really interested to hear it.
Well, the gold example that we started with is interesting, because the value of gold is actually determined objectively. While as human beings, we can all have subjective feelings about what gold is worth.
Okay,
right?
but like
when
you say
gold is,
we have to be very careful.
Let me
okay.
just finish making.
Okay,
gold. So I can feel gold is not very valuable, right? You can feel gold is worth way more than people are charging for it. But we objectively measure gold by the value of the last exchange on this stock exchange. Now, once that trade takes place, then it becomes objective, because it's history. We've recorded it. We've said, this is what gold is trading at.
We have to be careful with the word objective here, because what we need is we need to contextualize what our objectivity is measuring. So like, here's an objective statement, okay? Gohan in an anime called Dragon Ball Z is stronger than Krillin. That statement is objective. We can measure the actual power levels that are scouted out in that anime, and that is just objectively true. But that's on the layer of, we're talking within the fictional realm of Dragon Ball Z, which character is objectively stronger. That doesn't mean that it's an objective fact of the world that Gohan exists and Krillin exists, and Gohan is objectively stronger than Krillin. We're making like a normative comparison of these two things, but only under the understanding that these two things exist in a fictional world. So when you tell me like the value of gold is objective, kind of, it's objective in the sense that within our like subjective understanding of economics and trade, we have some value that we kind of agree that we can trade gold for, but that's not the same as saying that gold has an objective value independent of humanity in the real world, the same way that like the sun objectively exists, right? Like even though we're saying objective both times, we're kind of talking about different worlds or different contexts when we use the word objective here.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. On the subjectivity thing, I mean, you're talking about a fictional realm though, but this is the case for morality is a bit different, because you're talking about a set of rules that govern a society or an organization, and that organization is going to live or die based on those rules. So if those rules are ineffective, then that society will die out, and another society with another set of rules will take its place. Those rules are much more real than some fictional storyline.
Well, but why should you value a society dying out or not dying out?
Hmm. Well, it's my society,
Yeah, but why?
obviously,
But where is this
I want my
objective
society
notion
to
that like a
thrive.
society ought to exist? Like, where do we find that in the world?
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting philosophical debate. The I'm not sure. Obviously, those ideas are very subjective. As a human, I'm a speciesist, I guess you'd say. I want my species to thrive over
Yeah, but
other
like, where is
species,
the
but I would like
objective?
other species to thrive
Yeah,
too.
but so like these are descriptions, right? We have
Right.
descriptive statements like humans want to survive or whatever, or normative statements, right? Like humans want to survive in the world.
Hmm.
Like, but where's the moral statement from that? How do we say like, oh, well, a human being ought to survive, or some given society ought to survive? Like, how do we? That's I don't think that's a real thing, and that's what like our morality is kind of like resting on, is this idea that humanity ought to survive. Like, I don't think you can objectively declare that. There's just no way. We don't have the ability to do that. I don't know if that's possible to do.
Once the and I've debated this point as well. So if you're arguing that morality is a set of rules that binds people into a cooperative group, and that group competes uh, in towards a goal, basically, there's a lot of scholarship on morality uniting people into a community, and that goal is somewhat sacred to that community. This is why different communities have sort of a blindness towards anything that might disrupt that goal.
Okay. But
What
you're
that
giving me
goal.
descriptions, though. I'm not getting a prescription from any of this. Just because a community wants to survive, why ought it
Mhm.
survive? Ticks want to survive. Mosquitoes want to survive.
Right,
But we don't consider
right.
them worthy of survival. We say that our subjective moral interpretation is superior to theirs, right? Well, we want to survive over them, so we kill them, right? Much the same as two competing groups of humans might try to kill each other. So it seems like morality, what we're talking about as morality, is just a description of things wanting to survive. How is this, like, in any sense, like an objective or real morality? Like,
Well, you're describing the goal as subjective, and I agree with you that the goal is subjective. But once we choose a goal, we empirically can figure out how much closer or further away from that goal we're getting.
yep,
Then
I 100%
it
agree. 1
totally
million
becomes
percent.
objective.
But what you
Yeah.
just described is subjective morality. This is why I don't like meta ethics. I like normative ethics.
Mhm.
So I think that we should
Okay.
just choose a goal and say, fuck it. So reduce human suffering.
Let's do it.
Yeah, but this is subjective now. But so I would say like we should probably reduce all human suffering, and that's my like
Okay.
goal. That now there's no way I can justify that. It's totally subjective. Somebody could just use to say we ought to like maximize human suffering, and I would be forced to say like, oh yeah, we could, and then you would kill that person because fuck them, and then you would just say like, okay, well these are the goals we're trying to maximize society. We can't justify these. We know it. Fuck it, and then you just move on from there, and you say fuck meta ethics, and you go right into like, should we be utilitarians or deontologists, and then how should we have our individual little moral positions? But that's it. But to say that like to pretend that just because we've arbitrarily chosen some starting position that all of our measurements thereafter are somehow objective. I mean, they're objective with respect to our subjective foundation, the same way that any strength of a fictional character is objective in regards to the subjective fictional world that they inhabit. So for instance, Iron Man could always kill Spider-Man. That's an objective statement with respect to the subjective fictional world of Marvel. The same way that we ought not kill somebody is objective with regards to the subjective foundation of we ought to like maximize human happiness or reduce human suffering. That's like my ultimate argument for like why morality is like all subjective. Like we have like subjective statements, but they're always in relation to some subjective starting position that's completely and totally unjustifiable.
This is an argument that I can't really win because there's not a lot of empirical study here. But
Well, I would
it's
say
funny
that
that
it exists outside the realm of science. Science can never analyze these types of philosophy. Like philosophy comes squarely before science. Science can't analyze philosophy ever.
E.O. Wilson is one of my favorite biologists, and he was in favor of us kind of biologizing philosophy. That sooner or later we were going to have to ground philosophy in evolution. So but you agree that the objectives, that the goals of evolution are objective, correct?
So
Well, you said it was reproduce more, right? It's basically a simple
Yeah,
program.
I just that
Reproduce
the
more.
word goal there is like really loaded. Like I believe that evolution is a thing. It's a process that happens. Like
Sure.
I would be uncomfortable saying like evolution has like a particular purpose or goal in mind. It's more just that like certain genetic material is more suited to reproduce and pass on itself to other genetic material. Like that just seems to be a thing that happens. I mean, I guess in some ways we can say there's like kind of like a goal of a creature or whatever, but I'm a little hesitant to say like the goal of evolution is to do something. Like evolution is purposeless. It just is. It's just a process that exists. The same way that photosynthesis like doesn't have the goal of converting sunlight into some usable energy. It's just a process by which sunlight is converted into usable energy.
But if you don't have reproduction, variation, and selection, you don't have evolution, correct?
You would require,
you have to have
you need some sort of variation,
variation, and selection. That's a simple program.
Yeah,
Repeat.
for sure. Yeah.
So reproduction in evolutionary terms is kind of the goal.
Yeah, I just don't like goal because goal implies intent. Like there's some intentionality. But like, yeah, I mean, I guess if we were to say it had a goal, like the same way that the goal of a compiler is to compile code with no error or whatever, or turn it into a usable program, I guess we could say that, sure. I just don't like there's a very big like intentionality there when people say, does evolution have a goal? That's the only thing I'm trying to get away from. But yeah, sure, I guess if we were to say it had a goal, that would be the goal, sure.
Are you a utilitarian? Because I think
yes.
You mentioned it briefly. I don't. It seems like you can't get away from utilitarianism, but it's the thing that like the Christians are always hitting me over the head with, and I'm like, it seems like if you view morality in this way as a set of rules that binds people together, the outcome of that seems to be some kind of utilitarianism, because there's this innate democratic process that takes place within that group. If you get 90% of the people in that group just hating their lives, that group is not stable. Like in order to maintain a stable group, you have to have the majority of people buying into the system willfully. Otherwise you get rebellion. So it seems like the state of the world is utilitarian. And this is just my moral intuition. So
maybe. I mean, yeah, that's kind of a separate argument. Like, I think you could probably do like other things. Like, you don't necessarily have to be a utilitarian if you believe like in an objective or subjective morality, or if you're religious or not religious. Like, you could technically be something besides a utilitarian, right? You could be a deontologist if you wanted to. So, like for instance, like Kant wasn't religious, but he was a deontologist and believed that morality was real. Like, but I don't know.
So.
Yeah. What's
so
up?
Do you feel like you understand my argument? Do you feel like you could steel man my argument? All I really wanted to do was lay out the argument for you.
Yeah, man, I think I understand it pretty well. Yeah.
Does it make more sense than most of the objective morality claims that you're getting? Like it's the one with Tom Jump. I don't even know if I could steel man that argument, because I really don't know what his argument is. Mine's a very grounded in evolution, grounded in reality argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand your argument. I think I could give the argument like pretty well, but I feel like it just needs to go one step back to realize that it's subjective in and of itself, I think. But yeah, I mean, like I think I understand your argument as well as I can.
So the goal is subjective.
Yeah.
But you're saying that, well, eliminating human suffering is your personal goal.
Sure, but it's subjective. I can't really justify that in any way.
Right. It's just you pull it out of air.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, this was an interesting discussion. Would you do you have anything else, or?
No, I think that's about. No, I think I've said my piece. Whatever. Do you have anything else?
No, I don't. Thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the conversation. I appreciate it.
I have one super chat to read. I don't know if you want to stick around for that.
Go for it.
Drew Welty for $1.99 says utilitarianism leads to the repugnant conclusion. Yeah, that's the kind of shit I get.
Wait, leads to the repugnant conclusion that what?
Yeah, exactly. What is the repugnant conclusion? I think they all want to say that utilitarianism leads into genocide, because they can pull out these examples where it's like, okay, you walk into a doctor's office. Mm-hmm. And isn't it better to cut out all of your organs and give them to like 10 people than to I mean, that's an extreme case of utilitarianism. Any moral system is going to have problems like that. So obviously a moral system you want to build rules that work around that. And like evolution is trial and error. So moral systems are in effect trial and error.
Sure.
Do you want to, maybe we can talk a little bit about Jordan Peterson. The video that I originally, I got a smile on it.
Oh God.
The original video that I had made, I was ribbing you a little bit about Jordan Peterson. You had made one comment about Jordan Peterson only makes prescriptive or descriptive claims, but never makes any prescriptive claims. And I was like, Destiny, he wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah, he makes a lot of self-help prescriptive claims, but he won't do it about social issues that he talks about. So, for instance, Jordan Peterson will come on and say, like, women cause a lot of trouble in the workplace. We don't know what we're going to do with them, and there's a ton of issues that have been caused. But he won't actually say, like, because it leads you to believe, like, well, should women be removed from the workplace? Or, like, what's your suggestion there? But then he never gives any at the end. And then it seems like his fan base kind of runs with that sometimes, and then makes a bunch of, like, damaging or harmful prescriptive statements.
What is your opinion on enforced monogamy, Destiny? Is enforced monogamy a good thing?
Probably not. I mean, it might be. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I haven't seen it like played out in a society.
Wow. But that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the enforced monogamy would be a moral prescription, right? That would be a part of your moral system.
Well, any type of like policy is necessarily like a moral thing because you're telling people to do something. So when we have a policy, like policy is a prescription, which is like a moral ought, like you ought to do this thing generally.
Yeah, you're way ahead of most people because most people, I say that too, and they don't even realize that laws are moral statements.
A little bit, yeah.
We don't make laws because laws are morality. You're basically saying, yeah, this is such an important rule that we're going to objectify it by writing it in a book, right? So if your moral system, and this is one of the problems that I have with moral subjectivists, is because they always want to jump to that rape argument. They want to say, well, if you're basing your morality on evolution, then wouldn't the best system be just for everybody to be a bunch of rapists? And that system would break down pretty quickly and be overrun by people who had a more cohesive moral system. I mean, nations in many ways are competing on their moral systems. Authoritarian regimes have a moral system that we find detestable in the West, and it lacks innovation. This was the argument that I was making with Vosh in our debate, is that if you have an authoritarian regime that stifles innovation, that system is constantly going to be outcompeted by a system that has free people that are free to innovate. Like right now, China is stealing our innovation because they have an authoritarian system that doesn't have creative destruction. So,
yeah.
So
I mean, I don't disagree. I generally fall in line with like liberal principles of like freedom and everything. Although it's possible that China's system might be superior. I guess we'll see. Like right now, our system is not doing too hot. So.
Yeah, what are some of your critiques of our system?
We're too top heavy right now. I think capital is favored too much in society. Capital gives you a lot of power. Labor is getting pretty fucked right now, and the people at the top are doing too well considering how fucked the people at the bottom are, I think.
Yeah, income inequality is something that bugs me too. Are you in favor of UBI?
Possibly. I would have to see how it plays out or what the costs are for UBI, so I'm not sure.
Everybody sends me this study that they did in Finland where they took 2,000 unemployed people between the ages of 25 and 53, I think. And they actually say in the study that they in no way means tested. And I was like, are you kidding me? You means tested when you picked 2,000 unemployed people. Like, I've had a job since I was 16. What kind of 25-year-old doesn't have a job? So they give money basically to the least productive members of society, and then those people don't produce anything. And they wonder why. So the idea behind UPI is you give money to people who are productive people of society that are just basically the working poor without resources. Well, you buy into the fact that it takes money to make money, right?
Yeah, of course. I don't know if the goal of UBI is to only give money to people that are already working. Like, I think UBI is supposed to be a bit more general than that. To make
no, yeah, it gives it to everyone.
Yeah.
So you inadvertently give money to the most productive people in society, because you don't necessarily know who those people are going to be.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll go ahead. You've been very generous with your time, Destiny. I'll let you go. If you have any final thoughts, or
No, not really. I appreciate the conversation.
take care, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, like, we looked this up for California, and that wasn't exactly true. You can't just, like, when you sell a property to a new person, I don't think the rent control just disappears all the time. I think this is like